Okay. With so much special technology and makeup, I feel like I'm doing a debut on the big stage. And I want to use this stage to thank the Polar Club for the kind invitation to come here and present a small part of my research. And of course, congratulate them for reaching middle age. Okay. As you might notice, the title of this presentation does not really coincide with the title written in the program. And when I was invited in early October, I provided the title you saw first. But when I looked at the program, coming back from fieldwork in Kyrgyzstan, I noticed that my colleague Helle, who was organizing my visit, has liked this topic, which is part of a bigger project, and I'm by no means the only author of this project. But during my presentation, I'm definitely going to address some of the topics that this title introduces, and these are coloniality, community perspectives, and social justice. Decolonization has become the new buzzword in Russian, Eastern European, Eurasian, post-Soviet studies and other derivatives, other fields. Decolonization is attributed diverse meanings in different disciplinary domains and political debates. But in Russia, which is one of my major fields of research, in Russia, such debates are condemned as extremist attempts to destabilize ethnic unity of the country. The Russian opposition, in the face of Yulia Navalnaya, appointed as its voice after the tragic death of her husband, Alexei Navalny, publicly took a negative stand on the decolonization of Russia. In Russian media, by the opposition abroad and within some academic fields, decolonization seems to be interpreted as the dissolution of the Russian Federation into multiple small states. I'm not an expert on politics, and I'm not sure if this is to be interpreted as a positive ending or a negative process, but the understanding does not fully resonate with scholarly debates, where colonialism is often problematized in the sphere of knowledge and identity. One of the main assertions of decolonization scholarship is that marginalized and colonized subjects can only be decolonized if hegemonic understandings of their inferior identities are transformed. Indigenous scholars, intellectuals, and communities have offered forms of knowledge and self-understanding of their cultures and identities, as well as critical analysis of dominant societies and economies. In this context, this concept of settler colonialism, increasingly discussed by indigenous and mainstream scholars, including in the Nordic countries, is important as it contextualizes indigenous experiences of colonialism. Sami people, for example, have been pushed further north in their earlier territories of occupation since 16th century by waves of colonists. Colonization of Sapmi, as Sami called their territory, the unity of Sami people in 4 different countries, has been promoted by governments that stimulated first farmers and agriculturalists to settle in the area. Later, it helped loggers, mining, and builders. Settler colonialism, according to anthropologist Patrick Oof, is distinctive from overseas colonialism, which aims both at territorial and human resource expansion as labor force, and by appointing local people as an obstacle to the appropriation and exploitation of natural resources. As historians show, in settler colonialism, colonizers aim local inhabitants' disappearance through assimilation, physical displacement, elimination, and erasure of culture. Coloniality. The structures of colonialism have long been studied, and concepts like Orientalism, post-colony, subalterns navigate scholarship towards better grasping how knowledge and identity are products that reproduce in history the impacts and inequalities of colonialism through racism, identity policies, social and economic segregation, and unequal access to resources. Coloniality has become particularly influential in the last decades in parallel with the term epistemological colonialism. According to the semiotician Walter Mignolo, coloniality points to the ongoing epistemic power structures of colonial logic. Coloniality does not only happen in previously colonized places or settler colonies, but in world power structures internalized into our epistemic systems. Modernity and coloniality are inseparable, and modernity has created many dichotomies that continue to navigate our understandings of the world today. For Mignolo, decolonization is first of all delinking from the imposed dichotomies articulated in the West. Linkages between rationality as modernity and coloniality have to be cut off. Decoloniality emphasizes plurality of epistemic systems and different peoples and suggests freeing oneself from imposed Western modern epistemes. The concept of coloniality is intended to liberate and expand not only knowledge production, but also to draw attention to the colonial origin of the contemporary constellations of political and economic power and their sources. Decoloniality is not returning to an imagined pre-colonial past, but is an alternative future with demasked power relationship and pluriversal ways to exercise agency, autonomy, free choice, and identities. Scholars and indigenous people have for several decades now raised awareness about and debated indigenous and local knowledges as an important and legitimate component of environmental knowledge. Despite this powerful advocacy and research funding opportunities, there are little ostensible results and no popular awareness of the problems that indigenous people identify as blocking their access to environmental stewardship and governance. Existing practices of integration of local knowledge are experienced by many people as a new form of appropriation of indigenous culture. Indigenous people feel disempowered in relation to their environmental experiences and knowledges, as center-located and educated scientists are often in control of the definitions what folk knowledge is relevant, how it is to be documented, incorporated, and used in the future. Integration of indigenous knowledge, according to indigenous activists and scholars, is not a partnership among actors with equal knowledge, power, and control over resources. Projects aiming the integration become rather an expression of unequal power relations that reproduce hegemony over indigenous land, economy, and culture. For example, Sami reindeer herders' knowledge on the impact of predator populations, wind power parks, or tourists in Nordic countries have been often ignored or questioned. Indigenous economy practitioners have been criminalized and their ecological knowledge degraded by blaming them for overgrazing, the use of snow scooters and other innovative transport technologies, and illegal poaching of predators. Such representations, as scholars persuasively argue, tend to underestimate or hide the context of contemporary reindeer economy that is being stifled by increasing limitations of resources, by allotting grazing lands to hydropower, mining, wind power, and tourism enterprises. One-way communication that ignores herders' viewpoints and explanations, marginalization of indigenous knowledge and ecological judgment by externally ascribed definition of appropriate indigenous cultural practices and traditions. Swedish anthropologist Åsa Dahlström describes a process of two-way appropriation of indigenous knowledge in the negotiations between reindeer herding communities and Swedish environmental authorities in the World Heritage Site of Laponia. Through the acceptance of indigenous knowledge within mainstream management structures of Laponia in 2006, it is being put under the stricter control of scientists and state authorities. For Sami people, the Laponia process has been a political issue, in contrast to environmental authorities and the Swedish population, who perceive it largely as the Sami right to culture debate. Being institutionalized in nature conservation management, however, indigenous knowledge is being depoliticized, which will lead to loss of its integrity and capacity to empower indigenous bearers, practitioners, and leaders. Dahlström also argues that from a science perspective, indigenous knowledge can be incorporated through a process of translation to forms useful for environmental science, which means being abstracted from its local and temporal contexts and practices, being generalized and depersonalized and repurposed. In the process, it is alienated from its bearers, who are threatened to lose control over it and its future transmission. Thus, instead of a mean of decolonization, as expected by experts, indigenous knowledge incorporation becomes a means of its appropriation and normalization of colonial stereotypes and biases. As another anthropologist, Hugh Beach, has shown, in order to build up credibility in the eyes of mainstream authorities and environmental sciences, Sami reindeer herders had to transform their image and knowledge to comply with the general stereotype of them as ecological people. Hegemonic representations of what authentic indigenous culture is provide means for criticism and continuous marginalization of indigenous economic practices on the ground of not matching the dominant society stereotypes of ecological nobles and pre-modern primitive, or science's authentication. In a number of instances, Sami knowledge poses challenges and is both a field of empowerment and a conflict in nature conservation in Nordic countries. Even when incorporated in nature conservation state institutions, like Laponia case, through joint management arrangements, it continues to be subjected to dominant scientific paradigms of land use and governance of protected natural territories. In popular debates, indigenous people have been pointed to as hindering economic development in the north. Thus, in Nordic and in Russian contexts, duality of representation provides opportunities for their marginalization and criminalization along several lines and contexts. Indigenous rights are interpreted and questioned as ecological privilege on top of shared national citizenship rights, to which the welfare and social security state system provides universal access. Reserving territories for cultural rights, as reindeer herding and fishing, is also questioned against industrial development through mining. The latter can increase wealth and welfare in peripheral regions like the Arctic for everyone. Indigenous people are thus drawn as immoral and exploitative, hindering common good and equal sharing of state territory and resources. I hope there is no need to repeat that such populist imaginaries obscure the structures of inequality inherent in the distribution of both access to resources in the Arctic and to the distribution of the assets from their exploitation. Particularly acute and resonant in European contexts are conflicts between indigenous users and economic interests described under the paradigm of green economy, energy transitions, and the Sustainable Development Goals. The immediacy of climate change, the uniformity of scientific records, and strong popular emotion contribute to relatively easier justification of hegemonic knowledge and authority in prioritizing certain forms of nature exploitation and economic interests over indigenous rights, nature preservation, and social justice. Many examples from Nordic countries have been published and analyzed. So, in the remaining few minutes, I will here instead present briefly a recent case, or mention about a recent case from the European part of Russia. The case also illustrates how the intersectional impact of climate, political, economic, and historical change reinforced each other to cause near extinction of an indigenous economy like reindeer herding. And the area in focus is the Kola Peninsula, where I have literally conducted field research since 2001, when, as Aymar mentioned, we were PhD students. So on this picture, actually you see the same area from two different perspectives. And on this picture has been taken 2012, and the boy in the front is my son, who then was 1 year old. And this is how this coastal area looks nowadays, or it looked in 2022, 1 year before the company got a license actually to start exploiting the deposit there. Now, this lake represents one of the reindeer herding bases, what is called in Russia Baza, of Brigade number 8 of reindeer herding enterprise named Tundra. This is a map of the Kola Peninsula, and for those who like more arty maps, that's a picture that I have drawn on this area with the territory that this one part of this reindeer herding enterprise uses, and the line marks the migration. Base camp Ketkozaru is very close to the area where this deposit is. Now, this is a very quick picture of the demographic structure of this region, with the Sami being the smallest black line there in this cake, piece in the cake, and next to them are the Komi, and those two groups are both the reindeer herding people of the region. And I have observed for a long time how reindeer herding population in these enterprises is represented officially in statistics, and eventually how reindeer herders comment the disappearance, the melting, or the reindeer herding, the reindeer herd being eaten up by what is locally visualized as poaching, but is the result of intersection of different processes. And here you can see the intersection of processes. I'm out of time, right? Okay, good. If that's the case, I will go directly to the end. And I'm privileged to be sitting also on the round table, so a few of the points there I will also articulate later. So those are just illustrations. Just a final picture, as we saw yesterday and today, a different illustration of scientific exploration in the Arctic. This is how it looks when you are doing research with the indigenous people in the Arctic. It's slightly different pictures. Thank you very much for your attention.